on air is live. Week 11 in the 11th month of the year. It's getting serious. It's getting serious in our fantasy leagues. You know what you need to do. You know if you're just playing spoiler. You know if you're trying to go for a bye week. And also, of course, the stakes in the NFL get higher every week. Gene Bramwell, Matt Waldman joining me to break everything down. And, Gene, we're going to jump into injury situations. Maybe not quite as murky as it has been in recent weeks as far as not knowing, although sometimes knowing doesn't help us have more clarity going forward. Let's start with Alshon Jeffrey. Report this morning that he's unlikely to play. What does this mean? Are we back in the same cycle? Is this one of those time as a flat circle thing where we're back to week 2, and if you have Jeffrey and you were counting on him as your wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, you might need to make other plans?
You might need to make other plans, but I think the fact that he came back as effectively as he did in the middle of the year once he took some time off is reassuring. And we know that the Cutler-Jeffrey connection is good, and that offense isn't terrible when all the parts are in place. So if, as we assume, we get both Forte and Jeffrey back next week, and then they have another 10 days to recover as we lead into the fantasy playoffs, then I think that's as good a connection as any. And both of those guys have proven that they're capable of 100 to 150 total yards and multiple touchdowns in any given game. So, we don't know exactly the status of the injury. He didn't look good last week. John Fox, in a moment of weakness, told everybody on Monday that they used Jeffrey as a decoy, and how on Monday. That's the only thing I think we've heard out of Fox all year long that had a ring, some sort of ring of truth to it.
Yeah.
So I think they're aiming towards next week, Thursday, knowing that they've got 10 more days after that, and hopefully we see a healthy Jeffrey,
right,
and things go from there.
So what about Thursday? I mean, just looking ahead, just give us pull the number out of the air. I mean, is he 50? You think he's 50-50, or is this like a rest him today because they want to have him on Thursday, or is this more likely it's the same picture going into Thursday as it was going into today?
Unless there was some sort of setback last week that we didn't see on the field and the Bears aren't telling us, I think they put him on the practice field Wednesday, saw that he wasn't any better from Sunday, and it had already been a week and a half, and they had known what they had gone through previously with the calf problem and the hamstring issues, and said, well, you can, as I wrote, you can say that they shut him down on Thursday because they didn't want to stress both Forte and Jeffrey on that indoor turf field. But then for him not to be on the practice field on Friday says that they had made that decision pretty early on Wednesday that he just wasn't going to be able to play this week. And I think it's too early to say anything for Thursday, but I see it, especially since he played the week before and at least looked okay. I think it's a more reassuring sign, unless we get some sort of report from one of the national media guys today that there was more of a setback last week than we realized. But if that's the case, I doubt they would have put him out there for a limited practice on Wednesday. You'd have seen him not practice on Wednesday, maybe try to practice on Friday with the intent of playing today. I think they knew very early on that, let's do 10 days to next Thursday. Let's do 10 days to follow that and roll from there. I think there's a pretty good chance he plays on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Okay, so Matt, let's talk about this game. Let's talk about the Chicago-Denver game, all right? Sans Alshon Jeffrey. Jay Cutler's been playing pretty well. Obviously, the matchup is tough. I think we've seen some outside signs that Denver's going to be pretty fired up for this game, that they're happy, that the defense is happy with the quarterback change. Now we have potential guys in this offense to pick up the slack, Matt, like Jeremy Langford, probably not Matt Forte, Martellus Bennett. Now, we could talk about Marcus Wilson, but it's Denver's corners. I mean, maybe Marcus Wilson surprises us and makes a few individual plays. Not something to count on for your fantasy lineup. Do we think that Cutler and Langford and Bennett and Zach Miller can have enough success to be something resembling an offense, or is this going to be another game where Denver's defense shows that they're one of the best units in the league? You're on mute.
I think on paper you could say that that's what's likely going to happen, but you got to look at what Denver's given up against tight ends, and they've certainly been somewhat generous in that regard. And if the Bears have any success, it is going to come in the middle of the field with Miller and Bennett together. And I think that if that happens, you could see this defense get down early because they're going to go, oh, here we go. Brock Osweiler isn't playing if Osweiler doesn't play well. They could end up thinking, well, all right, now we've gone to Osweiler. We're all excited. And you could see the air get taken out of this team very fast, because if you don't think that this team is a little bit psychologically fragile at this stage, where they should be a much more dominant team and they couldn't get it done with a Hall of Famer, and he's been struggling as bad as he is. If the backup comes in, who's had years to prepare, and doesn't show the promise and doesn't take this team, doesn't make this team any better, and if he makes it worse, this team could have a collapse.
Yeah.
So I think that I think they're a lot more fragile than it appears right now. There may be relief that on the practice field, Brock Osweiler can do the things that Gary Kubiak wants him to do, and maybe the team being relieved is Gary Kubiak's observation of what's going on, filtered through the team.
Right.
But once once the lights come on, we need to see whether Osweiler can get it done from a performance angle. And so if that's a big issue, and I would say this is, of course that means that it makes Chicago kind of a real boom-bust scenario, because if the Broncos just kind of, that air goes out, Jay Cutler has enough of a killer instinct and enough of the tools to put a team away. And at least, if they get a lead, and, again, if you don't think John Fox and Jay Cutler aren't thinking about their time in Denver,
Sure,
and have an opportunity to do this, then you're the same person who thinks that who believes athletes when they say they don't read anything in the media. Yeah. So I'm not. This is the type of situation that if you're playing this as a 1 week thing and you're looking for a long shot that might make good, I'd look at the tight ends in this game and probably give it a shot. I'd look at Jeremy Langford out of the backfield, even if I don't know if Forte's playing or not, but if Forte is playing, then I'd still look at Jeremy Langford as possibly a decent passing option here.
Gene, on the other side, Emmanuel Sanders, who has been part of your column for any number of reasons this year. What's our outlook with him? And we have another layer to this, if you want to attack this or not, of a new offense, new quarterback, but just the injury medical situation. How can we understand where Sanders is right now?
Yeah, I felt like the way things had progressed, that the Denver coaching staff and Sanders felt like he was going to be able to go this week. But Jeff Legwold just posted something on Twitter a little while ago that said Sanders didn't look comfortable at all, and maybe it had something to do with the cold, but didn't look like himself during pregame warmups. Whether there's anything to that or not is hard to know. So there's some concern there. I also think it's going to be. We haven't seen Osweiler in this offense yet, other than those few snaps in garbage time last week, to know how they're going to set things up. Are they going to throw the ball downfield a little bit more? Are they going to allow him to, continue the Peyton Manning offense, which was a lot of screens and slips and slants? And will they try to establish the run a little bit today? It's hard to know exactly where Sanders is going to be. I would tend to think at this point, Legwold doesn't usually post things unless there's a little bit something behind them. So I would tend to think that Sanders is a little bit more questionable than what we expected coming into today, and I would probably avoid him if I had the choice. I think most of this offense is going to get funneled to Thomas and whichever of the running backs get the hot hand.
And that brings up another question for you, Matt. Just expectations of, and Demaryius Thomas is a good name, Ronnie Hillman is a good name, Owen Daniels or Vernon Davis is a good name, Brock Osweiler. Hey, I have to start Brock Osweiler in our Football Guys staff dynasty or staff redraft league. So expectations for Denver today, and if people are on the fence with any Denver player, what kind of guidance would you give them?
Well, I would say that the run game is probably where you want to look, and I think that if you're gonna, part of it is you're gonna have to just look at it as, understand that these are new expectations, and look at this as week 1 of the season, and ask yourself, if Gary Kubiak got to run an offense the way he wants to, what did the Baltimore Ravens look like? What did the Houston Texans look like? Who were the main key cogs here? And look at it not from what happened between weeks 1 through week 11 or week 10. You need to look at it as, okay, who's the substitute to Joe Flacco? Well, big arm, tall Brock Osweiler. All right, so you've got that. Osweiler has the ability to move in the pocket, so you can see a guy who's probably going to be able to throw the ball downfield, who's going to be able to roll out, and they're going to be able to do more play action work. That's going to benefit the tight ends. That means guys like Owen Daniels, who's a pro in this offense, is probably going to have a good day. You would think that if Vernon Davis doesn't have to learn all the complex little, when I scratch my ear, you're going to run
This
5
goes
yards
back to
instead of
like
7
Mike Shanahan
yards.
and the donuts. Like this is
Yeah,
Peyton Manning has a version of donuts. It's just
e-
interpreting all of his
exactly.
little things. Yeah.
Yeah, when I grunt once, I mean this, that kind of stuff. So you don't.
Omaha,
Oh,
Omaha. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Can you imagine? He's probably sitting there in the mirror, like staring there, going, "I can't believe I'm sitting here saying Omaha,
It's it's
Omaha."
and
You
by
know,
the way, I meant to say this. It was so weird hearing Omaha in a different voice. Like
yeah.
yesterday, I mean last week whenever Osweiler got in. That was one of the more surreal moments of last week.
I can't imagine he doesn't giggle when he has to actually say it. But it's like, you look at that, and that means that the tight ends probably Daniels is your safest play still until we see Davis show up. But Davis is your big, is probably the big boom bust play of the week. And yeah, I like Thomas to do well in this offense because you're going to see probably a few more crossing routes. You probably see a few more deep shots off play action. But the running backs are going to be your safest play, then to your tight ends, then to your big play receiver. And I would not be surprised if Osweiler just does his job. And if he just does that, and he shows that he's well versed enough in this offense the way that he ran it in practice, you could see a really nice day for him. I mean, but it's assuming a lot of rational things. We talk about assuming rational coaching. Well, we have to assume rational quarterback development for a few years, sitting back there and showing some little comfort level. And you'd have to look back at guys. I've had people ask me, well, isn't he on the Aaron Rodgers track? I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, certainly he's on that track, but you still need to be able to stay on that path, and it's a fairly bumpy road. So let's not presume that it's just a smooth straight line to becoming a great NFL quarterback because you got to sit. It just means that you have more time to prepare, and some of the silly things that make people look bad when they're really not that bad. I mean,
Yeah.
Johnny Manziel, Robert Griffin, players like that. He didn't have to worry about learning all these crazy things and packing in all this information and dealing with a much higher level of the game while he's trying to figure out, how he's managing his money, where he's living,
Right.
how to get used to a
Like at
schedule
age
outside of
22 or
school at
23.
age 22, 23.
Yeah.
So we're talking about a few years of more maturity, but it still doesn't mean at that point, though, he's still got to get out on stage. And if he's got stage fright or he gets a little, this level of play is still too much for him, it doesn't matter whether he can handle his finances. We've certainly seen players who are complete messes into their mid-30s outside the field, but when you put them on the field, they're great. So we're going to see what happens with him. I think that if you're going to start him, you just look at the Broncos a lot like the Texans or the Baltimore Ravens, and that means the running game comes first, the tight ends come second, and your big play wide receiver comes third.
And Sanders becomes a very dicey call this week because of those factors and the fact that we have multiple reports. Adam Schefter might just be piggybacking off of Legwold, saying that he does not look comfortable out there. And something else I want to bring up is Vic Fangio, Bears defensive coordinator. Last time he faced a Gary Kubiak offense was the death knell of Matt Schaub against San Francisco. So now that was a much, much better defense than the defense Chicago has right now. But as far as tactically matching up with it, and there's going to be some great larger discussions, Matt, about this whole idea of quarterback sitting and not sitting, because I think we're getting more data. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, and Chicago, I mean, is really bad against the run. I mean, they're ranked, I believe, in what are we looking at here? 25th against the run right now. And so if Denver's able to run against them, and that's kind of the if, but if they are, that play-action passing game is going to come into effect very much so.
Cecil's brought up how there's a lot of Kubiak's offense is based on flow, getting the flow of the defense going one way and then going counter to that flow. You just can't do that with Peyton Manning. He was incapable of doing it. There was no reason to honor anything, and he wasn't even trying to make them honor some of those things.
This offense is like this offense. If it were a person, it woke up with a really stiff neck with Peyton Manning on the field, and it's like it's been standing there. Yeah. It's been there for 10 weeks with a stiff neck where he can barely turn around, and that's the problem.
This is going to be a really fascinating early game for us to watch. Absolutely one that has, and again, 4-5 Chicago. You're still alive. 4-5. Still alive. Now, and I do think, by the way, I'll just add this out there. like you like to look for a kicker in your DFS lineups, Brandon McManus. I mean, this team now with this defense is going to be happy to settle for field goals. I mean, they like you said, Brock Osweiler, do your job. Run the play. If the play doesn't come open the way it's supposed to, throw the ball away or just sit down on the field. And we'll let our defense and the running game and everything else take care of business otherwise. Just don't add anything negative, and you are doing great, Brock Osweiler. Okay, Gene. Marshawn Lynch. Again, we have this week, and then we have our view for the rest of the season. And I'll add this context. I moved Thomas Rawls right up to the top of the handcuff desirability list once we saw Lynch's situation last week. Not seeing him on the field because he didn't look too bad on the field, just knowing that we're up to soft tissue injury number 3. So give us the outlook, the Gene Bramall outlook this week and long term with Marshawn Lynch.
Well, I thought he looked okay last week. I thought he was willing to run, and he ran pretty effectively, although they only gave him 8 carries and about 40-some-odd snaps of work before sort of limiting him as the second half went along last week. And I think we could easily see that. You could easily see a scenario where Lynch starts hot, does well, punches the ball in a couple of times against a terrible San Francisco situation. That defense, even though they're okay up front, may be on the field constantly in the first half. But you have to be concerned about the cascade of soft tissue things, as you talked about. We've seen back, we've seen groin, we've seen hamstring, and now we've got what's not being called a sports hernia, but is probably somewhere in that category, to be honest with you. I'm not sure. This is one of the few times where it's hard to fully buy into what Jay Glazer says when he says that they were comfortable that it wasn't sports hernia related. I don't know about that. But the problem today is going to be if they get out on a big lead against San Francisco and Lynch wasn't involved in that lead, then you can easily see them rotate in Thomas Rawls a whole lot more, especially in the second half where you would expect Lynch to get the bulk of his carries and maybe the bulk of his fantasy goodness when they got ahead. I just don't think that's going to be the case today. Longer term, it's I think you have to call him week to week at this point and hope that Jay Glazer is correct, that it's more of something else. But we were told that it was in that lower abdomen groin area, and that's where those core abdominal muscles that make up sports hernia type things are. So I think there's reason to be concerned about him. I'd absolutely have Rawls high on my radar if you're looking to stash somebody for the rest of the season. Lynch is probably going to play through this. He may play through it as effectively as Adrian Peterson did a few years ago rather. But it's going to be a week-to-week proposition about whether or not he's going to be able to get those 20 to 25 touches you'd want out of him.
So on the other side of the ball, the other side of the offense, Matt, we've been waiting for Russell Wilson, other shoe to drop because he's been so mediocre for fantasy week after week after week. I'll just say that if he doesn't do it this week at home against San Francisco, whose pass defense has been terrible on the road, then we really, really have a problem. As in, you wait for him to have a 30-point game on your bench before you start him. Is this that 30-point game that's going to be on a lot of people's benches?
Probably not. I mean, I haven't seen. We haven't seen the offensive line do what it needs to do. We don't see any wide receiver who's really stepping to the fore and becoming that must-go-to player. And you combine that. Or
Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, well, he's a wide receiver. I know that he's defined. He's defined as a tight end. But come on, if you can't, the way he blocks, it's tight end. If there were a union for tight ends, they would have kicked him out. So, I mean, he's just not he's not. I mean, so we look at this situation and I think that, Paul Richardson flashed something last week, then promptly pulled a hamstring, after dealing with this ACL injury that he had. So you're kind of expecting, I'm sure Gene's expecting half the time with anybody with an ACL tear that they're going to have some sort of probably, muscle strain or issue once they start to open it up for real in a game when they come back. And certainly Richardson did that. But, Richardson is probably that type of player that you have to look at and say he was their best shot. And unless he gets healthy really quick, I don't see it. I mean, I think that probably 2 to 3 weeks ago, if you look back at it in hindsight, 2-3 weeks ago is the point where you're like, it's time to get another quarterback. Now, you may still be able to get one now. Some of you are probably looking at Brock Osweiler and hoping that he that he's able to execute this offense the way that he needs to. The defense plays well, and you at least have a Nick Foles Philadelphia year one situation in Denver, and that's possible. So I would probably suggest people to go out and get a guy like Osweiler, keep Wilson on your bench, and hope for the best. Or you start Wilson this week and just say, look, it's now or never. You hold on to a guy like Osweiler or Manziel and say, well, if it doesn't work for Wilson this week, then I'm going to the other guys from this point forward, because San Francisco 49ers pass defense, I mean, they give up big plays left and right. And even though you might look at some of the stats from previous weeks like Atlanta where they only gave up one, it was because, like we talked about on Thursday night's show, the Shanahan, the younger Shanahan needs to sit on Sigmund Bloom's couch and, untie some knots.
Yeah, definitely lots of knots to untie with Seattle, but this should be a get right game for Seattle, one way or the other, against San Francisco and Blaine Gabbert. Moving right along, we have Darren McFadden. Gene, we knew it was just a matter of time that we were going to talk about him on this show, but listen to my tone. I should not be this way. He played all 16 games last year. He's been getting a heavy workload. He's been off the injury report up until this point. We've heard from the team some things to downplay this precaution, slippery field. We've heard from other sources, we'll see. And also it's Darren McFadden, and he's on the injury report with a groin. And I think Ed Werder just said they're still going to use him as much as they want. By the way, just really quickly before I forget, not to jump subjects, as Matt was talking about Brock Osweiler and Johnny Manziel, let's toss Mark Sanchez into that conversation as someone you might pivot to from Russell Wilson. And there's now just a report coming about, which this was intuitively true if you just thought about it, that Sanchez can take this job. Regardless of Bradford's health, Sanchez can play well enough in these couple of games to maybe take this job. But getting back to the matter at hand here with McFadden, Gene, you're going to play. I mean, beggars can't be choosers at running back. You're probably going to play him this week at running back. But we have the picture of probably Robert Turbin as they're saying, he's done so well in his first week. Whoever the Dallas backup is, this is important. And it's just when Tony Romo gets back. It's just when things should finally start to resemble last year to some extent for this offense. Are you getting a bad feeling about Darren McFadden, or should we leave behind our understanding of Darren McFadden as at the first sign of trouble run and just let him reprove himself to us and maybe be just fine?
Yeah, I have no idea. This is the toughest one for me today because I think you can tell yourself either story. You can tell yourself that Darren McFadden has a groin injury. He never does well with soft tissue injuries. He's likely to play on a wet field, and that's just a mess waiting to happen.
Yeah, like first quarter, second drive.
Or you can look at that depth chart and see Rod Smith and Robert Turbin. You can see Romo and Bryant come back. You can know that they're going to give him as much volume as he can handle. And if he plays all 4 quarters against that Miami defense, which has been a little bit better up front, but still not tremendous, that he could get 30 touches today despite all of this. And maybe the Cowboys really weren't just blowing smoke up by telling us that it was precautionary this week, which I don't think that was the case. There's something clearly going on here. Just how significant it is really hard to know. But I think it really comes down to, do you trust Darren McFadden in wet weather, or do you look at that depth chart and say, I don't care if he's at all able to play, he's going to get 25 touches and roll from there. And as you said, I think beggars can't be choosers. If you've got McFadden on your roster, there's really not a better situation for him. And had it been almost anybody else other than McFadden without that injury history, you'd have said, let's give it a shot and see how we go. So I think that's probably what you do today. But recognize that, as you said, one slip in the first quarter, and he's going to be standing on the sidelines with a helmet, and we'll see what Robert Turbin can do. It's really hard to put a likelihood on that. So I think you play McFadden and hope that that's not what happens.
Matt, first and foremost, which story are you telling yourself about McFadden, or are you saying, hey, that's just not how I roll? I don't tell myself stories about anybody.
Yeah, I think I tell myself plenty of stories, but I would say this: if the idea that Robert Turbin looked good in practice fits with the idea that Kristen Michael was so impressive week 1, and the idea that Greg Hardy was a leader, and the idea that Jared Jones really is a competent general manager, and the idea that the only thing that or the idea that Dallas' stadium is just a horrible wreck of a dump. I mean, seriously, that's about the only thing, when you look at it, is the only thing out of that statement All those statements are false. Dallas Stadium's great. Greg Hardy isn't a leader. Jared Jones isn't a good general manager, and neither of these running backs have panned out. So I would just stick with McFadden, as much as that would probably pain me to say, because of the fact that the history that Gene mentioned here. Because seriously, if Robert Turbin looked that good, he'd still be in Cleveland. And neither of those running backs in Cleveland have played all that well, and they supposedly have a decent offensive line. Dallas has a better one, but still, I just find that a little odd. Then again, in Cleveland, they get a little touchy about certain things. So, if Turbin fumbles a ball, maybe Mike Pettin, he just got so frustrated that he said, "Forget this guy and let's move forward." But I'm looking at Stay Woke on my feed, and he's saying that Martellus Bennett said he can't block for manure.
Yeah.
And I'll say that in the nice way. But
Jimmy Graham, that is. We're with the Jimmy, that was a great Matt Waldman, one of the quotes of the year.
Well, I appreciate that. But yeah, and it's sad because I like Jimmy Graham and I own him in a lot of leagues. But he's a wide receiver. Let's not kid ourselves.
Just to unpack really quickly something you said. You don't sound excited about Robert Turbin. Like if we do see McFadden limp off the field in the first or second quarter, you don't sound like you're saying, "Hey, Turbin can get it done."
Turbin can get it done, but I'm not. At the same time, I would think that put Turbin in there right away. I mean, it's such a boom bust proposition to me because of preparation. You've got him, and then they still may look at Rod Smith and bring him and say he's been in a little bit longer. And when it comes from a talent standpoint, Rod Smith may be just as talented as Robert Turbin. Sure. It's just that Turbin is a more of a veteran in terms of playing in the NFL, but he's not a veteran of this offense. So this week's just very dicey. I would hate to be looking at my week and saying, who do I pick on the Cowboys reserves to take a chance on here? I would rather just find another team.
And chances are, what we would see if McFadden goes down is something very similar to what we saw week 1, where you have very distinct roles. I think Turbin would probably be in the Randall role to an extent, with a little bit more. Rod Smith would be in the McFadden role with a little bit more than McFadden got. And then we got to mention Trey Williams. And if there is a running back out of the 3 running backs behind McFadden who could just come out and make a couple of plays and make everyone say, whoa, we have to totally rethink this. Trey Williams is that guy. Matt Waldman has written about him extensively, so check it out. Sensational player. A player who has the ability to make some eyes pop out of your head plays if he gets the chance. Let's go back to more injury situations. John Smokey Brown. Oh, Gene. It almost feels like we've come full circle with him. I was just reading your tweet on him, and it's almost like we're back to where Brown's value was if you weren't super excited about him at the beginning of the year. Like, hey, throw him in your lineup any given week. You might get 3 for 50. You might get 3 for 80 and a touchdown. But give people the reason, because this is how I'm getting the question. And I own John Brown all over the place. And in the interest of full disclosure, unless I have obviously better option, which is it's week 11, there's 4 teams on bye, injuries and everything. I don't. I have John Brown in. I think there's one team that I have Landry, Allen Robinson, Dez Bryant, and Randall Cobb. And I have John Brown on the bench in that lineup. Otherwise, I've got him in. But what people are asking me, Gene, and what I'm asking you is, why should we think this week will be different than the last 2 weeks where he was active and did not get on the stat sheet?
I think the only way to put this together is that one of those hamstring aggravations he had a month ago was significant, or at least more significant than he or the team thought it was going to be. Because it's really no other way to put this together. We heard that he had a hamstring problem, came out and put up almost 200 yards the first week after. And then there was some concern the following week that there was a little bit more going on, did okay. And then he dressed and didn't play. And then they held him out through the bye, and he came back last week and didn't do all that much. And this week we're hearing him frustrated and just not happy with how things have progressed and remaining limited and questionable on the injury report, where I think everybody felt like after he came out of the bye last week, he was going to be pretty much full strength and good to go from there on out. So there's something more going on with that, obviously. I don't know that it's a big stretch to say that at this point, but I think that's the only way you put it together. And that puts us then forgetting about everything that's happened before, the same place we are commonly in these wide receivers that have had lingering injuries that have either been used as decoys or not healthy enough to separate and get open for Carson Palmer. The difference today is Michael Floyd probably isn't going to play. How much does Jerron Brown and J.J. Nelson have the attention of Carson Palmer? Are we going to see them try to use sets in which both Ellington and Johnson are on the field and move the ball that way? And all that has to do with how John Brown feels. And I think the only thing we have to go on this week is that he told reporters on Friday that he was grumpy with how things had moved along and he didn't feel like he was 100% yet. He's been productive when he wasn't 100% in the past. And I think this matchup at Carson Palmer saying that this is more than just a game, for whatever that narrative's worth, is enough that if it's a close decision, I would probably start John Brown and hope for the best. But I don't think this is a week in which you can count on 8 to 10 targets. I don't think this is a week in which you can count on Brown doing what he usually does downfield, either in quick breaking routes or, despite his size, going up and getting the ball. It's a boom or bust week for him, but I expect him to be active. I expect him to throw him the ball early, and if he gets started well, then I think it's going to be a good week for him. But it's just really difficult without knowing exactly where he stands to say how likely that is.
Gene did a great job setting the scene for this game tonight. What a nice game we're going to have. I mean, even if it's a game that I don't think Cincy's going to blow out Arizona. I could see Arizona blowing out Cincy, but that in and of itself has a bunch of implications and storylines, Matt. But I like the way that Gene is thinking ahead, because Bruce Arians isn't going to take his foot off the gas. Bruce Arians is going to be like, okay, well, Brown's limited, Floyd's hurt. We're gonna take it in. We're going to be conservative. No way. Where does the extra production overflow? He mentioned Jerron Brown and J.J. Nelson. We have, surprisingly because of the patterns, Jermaine Gresham being a lot more involved. Remember, when we saw going into the bye against Baltimore, John Brown was limited. We saw a lot more Jermaine Gresham. Gresham, I think, had 4 for 60-something, but had opportunities to have even more. And Darren Fells is healthy, too. And then there's Andre Ellington and David Johnson. I have a feeling, it's funny, I was watching David Johnson closely the week before the faucet was turned off for his touches, and there were like 3 touches he had where he double clutched the ball or juggled it a little bit on a toss play, and I think they were in the red zone on those plays, and I have a feeling Bruce Arians just said, no way. You know what? I'm not using him unless I have to. So that's why I'm limited to Ellington right now. Where's the overflow? Who's that secret star of the Cardinals offense that could pick up the slack?
I think it's going to be Jerron Brown or it's going to be Jermaine Gresham. Those are the 2 guys that you're going to place your best bet on, because J.J. Nelson is a really fast player, and he can catch the ball, but he's one of those guys that if David Johnson made him a little nervous, J.J. Nelson, in the way that he tries to catch the football at times, could also make you nervous. And I would say that, they're both talented guys that they hope will develop but aren't quite ready for prime time. So to me, yeah, Nelson could have a big play, but Jerron Brown has shown some things in games where he could step up to the plate and make plays on the big stage. And Gresham is just what a case of, for fantasy owners, this is kind of that fantasy owner advisory where you look at him with your long-term memory and go, he's the guy who's supposed to be really good, who never was ever nearly as good as he was supposed to be. And so you always look at him with that eternal disappointment. But if you really watch his game objectively, you have a solid player who can get open in the middle and gain some yards after the catch by either pushing a pile or making maybe one guy miss or at least breaking a tackle and getting you yards. And he wasn't Jimmy Graham as a receiver or Rob Gronkowski or any of those players that, Jermichael Finley in the way that people wanted him to be. But he's a solid player who's probably, athletically not on the tier of Martellus Bennett, but just a tier below that. And like you said, 50, 60, 70 yards, certainly possible with him, and consistently, I think you can expect 45 to 60 yards from him every week when a player like John Brown isn't going to be available. So to me, Jerron Brown, with what he can do as a route runner and his ability to make plays in contested coverage, and Jermaine Gresham with his boring but consistent play, and knowing him and Carson Palmer both being veterans, I think that's what you're probably looking for here. I would say that a guy like Jermaine Gresham is probably a safer play than someone like Vernon Davis in terms of if you're looking for something that's just going to get you through the week this week.
And I'm going to go ahead and say Andre Ellington here. what I like is Ellington saying now for the first time this year he feels fully healthy again. It's easy to forget because 3 months ago feels like 3 years ago that going into the season he was the lead feature back for this team. And the other thing is there was always a lot of talk and buzz that he was going to be a major passing game weapon. That they were going to have a lot of formations where he got out wide, and if Carson Palmer saw that he was matched up one-on-one against a safety linebacker, that he was going to target him. And we've seen Ellington take those kinds of plays to the house. So I think this could be a week that signals, if you're looking at waiver wire moves right now, and I know my credibility on Ellington is, so take it with a grain of salt. But if you make the hard choice to pick up Ellington today, don't wait until after this week, because if with him saying he's fully healthy and with there's some opportunity floating around this offense to land on somebody, this could be the week that Ellington comes back full circle and finally starts to do for a full game. Watch, he'll do it, and then he'll get hurt. That's probably what's going to happen. Book it. Anyway, so Matt, what about the other side of this matchup? Because the last time we saw Andy Dalton, it was bad old Andy Dalton. And, on one hand, we have Joe Goodberry's common, uncommon opponents. This is an uncommon opponent. On the other hand, man, this looks like the kind of defense that would give Andy Dalton trouble. And we also have, speaking of, you did a great job painting a picture of how Denver as a team could lose their momentum. Cincy is absolutely in that spot right now. From a fantasy standpoint, geez, where do you even start? We've got A.J. Green to think about, who's probably matched up with Patrick Peterson. We've got Marvin Jones. We've got Tyler Eifert, who dropped multiple passes and said it was because it got in his head. We have Hill and Bernard, and what's going to come of that? We have a big old mess, the giant tangle of nasty hair at the bottom of your shower drain, based on how noxious the Cincy team played on Monday night. What do you expect to see from them tonight? How do they answer the bell in this very important week?
More of the same, with the exception of maybe A.J. Green doing well, because I don't trust Patrick Peterson against some of the bigger time wide receivers. And I think when I say bigger time wide receivers, I'm not talking about 10 guys. I'm talking about 3 to 5 guys, and Green is one of those 3 to 5 guys. Green is going to test him every play. And I just don't think that Patrick Peterson stands up very well against the top guys on a consistent basis. And I know that he's one of the better corners in the league, but I think that when you really challenge him, if you've got a player that can, that challenge you down after down after down, I think that he's a guy that you can make some big plays on, and I believe that Green has that ability of the speed, the technique, the quickness, the toughness, and the concentration and Andy Dalton absolutely has the willingness to throw bad balls up there for him to go get. So I think that Green to me would be the safer play in this particular game, but I think this is the start of the end for the Bengals run right here. I think they're going to have a mini slump. They'll limp into the playoffs, and it's all over for them. I don't think it's changed. Yeah, I don't think it's going to change all that much. I would like to say it will, but if Andy Dalton got angry about J.J. Watt doing the Red Ryder BB gun comment, which to me just seemed like, this is the type of stuff you'd hear from the 70s and 80s, and nobody would make a big deal out of it other than just laugh, and the players included. And the fact that he was that upset about it to go off just tells me that this is a guy who I don't think really gets it in terms of, understanding what this is all about on a level of, hey, look, it's the best guy, the best defender in the league just got one up on me. I need to take it like a man and just kind of move forward with it and just forget about it and yeah, haha, that was funny. I'll get you back next time, or at least try, So to me, no, if that's the leader of your team, if that's the CEO of your organization, I got my feelings hurt because I played bad, and you hurt my feelings. I'm sorry.
The seed of self-doubt is there, without a doubt.
Yeah,
it's insecurity. Absolutely. It's definitely a sign of insecurity.
I think this is a game where easily we're talking, and it's at Arizona. I think this is a game where the Cincinnati Bengals don't score more than 13 points.
Yeah, and the Cardinals on the other hand could score like 38 or more with like 1 or 2 touchdowns coming on defense. Gene, I'm trying to keep from cracking up there. I can see. AJ Green owners are pretty frustrated at this point because you're waiting for the 11 for 20 and enduring 4 for 50s and 5 for 60s along the way. How much should they be afraid of Patrick Peterson? How willing should they be to say, this is the week where I draw the line? I've been wanting to start this other player over him who's been producing and he hasn't, like Eric Decker or something. Is this the week where you say Patrick Peterson plus the mental state of the team is enough to pull the plug on Green for this week?
I don't know. I'd have to have somebody pretty good. I don't know if Eric Decker would be enough to pull the plug on Green. I'm a little bit more worried about Patrick Peterson than Matt is. I'm wondering if this is a Marvin Jones game. With Andre Smith back, maybe able to protect with them opening up the running game possibly a little bit more, at least enough to keep things honest. But, that secondary is 7 deep. I think Gerard Powers may be the weakest link there, but he's not terrible. If Andy Dalton can settle himself down enough and have enough time, to work on the matchups, and Hugh Jackson doesn't outthink himself, this may end up being a Marvin Jones game. But back to the original question, I don't think I'm benching Green today unless I've got a really, really good other option, because it's just it's very possible that they may still try to get him the ball 8 to 12 times, and that's enough for AJ Green to do a lot of damage with, especially if that offensive line holds up a little bit better than they have the past couple of weeks against Pittsburgh and Houston.
And the tough thing is, we saw last week, I think, Houston doing a little bit more to take Green away, and Andy Dalton just saying, okay, I'll move on to other players, forcing the ball deep to Marvin Jones. And what he might need and what this offense might need is forcing the ball to A.J. Green.
Listen. If you look at this Arizona Cardinals defense and who they've given up big games to, there are only 2 players they've given up 3 they've given up really big games to. Tavon Austin, who is very quick and who is someone who can make plays after the catch and has a little bit of that wiry running back mentality. You've got Doug Baldwin, 7 for 134, who is a decent route runner, and if you throw the ball deep to him, he's a good deep ball player despite the fact that he's small. And the guy who you would compare most to, A.J. Green, who had 6 for 137 and 2 touchdowns, and that's one Martavis Bryant.
But that was the long catch-and-run touchdown against an Arizona defense. That was that amazing Landry Jones play at the end of that game.
Yeah, but I'll say this, you still look at, you're still looking at, you take that one and it doesn't take away the other touchdown. It doesn't take away the other 5 catches. And you have to understand, too, that A.J. Green is just as capable as Martavis Bryant of having it was just that one play for X amount of yards and a touchdown that really put him over the top.
No, and
especially when Steve Smith had 5 for 78 and he was banged up all to high heaven during that game and still put up 5 to 78 against a guy like Patrick Peterson.
And what I hear when you say that, Matt, is the Cardinals' defense doesn't give up that many big games. Even the Doug Baldwin game was mostly just coming back when they were down big last week.
And they're going to be down big this week, and they're going to have to go to somebody. And Patrick Peterson, to me, I know he's an excellent player, but every time I see him against a top player who's going to push him hard, there's times that I see mental mistakes that I don't think he's as consistent, and I think that sometimes he gets by on his name a little bit more than he should.
And I want to Gene, we've got other quick injury things to touch on, like Romo and Vincent Jackson. It's basically safe to play.
Who, Jackson?
Vincent Jackson and Tony Romo, like people were on the...
Yeah, I think Romo's probably going to have some timing issues early. You can't replicate the speed of the game, both mentally and physically, during practice. So I think there's going to be some, a little bit of rustiness and inaccuracy and timing issues early. But I don't think there's any concern with him playing today. I think at some point he's going to come back to the effective Romo of old. Jackson, I'd be a little bit more concerned about. Yes, he was able to get some extra conditioning time in after practice this week, but this is really the first week that he's been back doing any football-related activity. And whenever you see a wide receiver who's been out multiple weeks, I generally like them to have more than a few days of football-related stuff before they come back. So I think there's going to be some conditioning issues there. He may not play every snap, but there's a lot more optimism today than there seemed to be Monday, Tuesday about him. I think, again, the way I always look at these things is try to estimate how many snaps, how many targets you think he'll get, and then decide how effective he's likely to be from there. I just don't see this being an 8 to 10 target game from Vincent Jackson, so you're looking at him as a boom bust wide receiver 3 or a high upside flex. I think he's going to play. I think he'll get through the game okay, but I don't know that he's going to be a featured part of the offense given how his practice participation went this week.
Yeah, I think I have him at like 4 for 45 today, And the other quick injury thing to touch on before I want to jump in, I just want to touch on about, there's so much fascinating stuff to preview or to prognosticate here. Antonio Gates, on one hand, new possible compensation injury with the hip. On the other hand, who else is, Phillip Rivers is going to throw to Gates and Stevie Johnson and Danny Woodhead, and we know they can't run the ball, and this is what we're looking at. So to me, those two things kind of cancel each other out. What do you think of that way of looking at it?
Yeah, I think that's the case again. We've seen Gates play and play effectively through limiting injuries in the past, multiple limiting injuries in the past. So I think you're going to see him continue to get those high leverage third down and red zone opportunities, and it's going to come down to whether or not Kansas City can defend them effectively. They've got the horses to do it, but Gates always seems to come up with a big play. This is another situation where I think you can expect the snap count and the target count to be lower than usual, but I think the ceiling is still there. So if you're willing to risk a little bit of a lower floor with Gates today, I think he's fine to use.
Gene, would you use a guy like Gates over someone, say, like C.J. Anderson?
Yeah, I think I probably would. You just don't know what you're going to get with C.J. Anderson. Right. If just because there's Hillman there, I just don't know how the Denver offense is going to go. So yeah, I think the high leverage opportunities are going to be there for Gates for sure, whereas they might not be there with Anderson. The question I got interestingly a lot over the last couple of days is Gates versus Clay.
Gates.
You guys have a feeling on that?
It's Gates. I mean, look, to me, this is a very simple, don't overthink this, okay? He's going to get 10 or 12 or 14 targets against Kansas City. I mean, it's just by necessity. And like you said, we've seen him, when he clearly can't operate the way he normally can, still be able to make the play at the moment of truth when he needs to. If I knew that going to the CJ Anderson thing, if I knew that CJ Anderson was going to get 12 to 15 touches, I might say CJ Anderson because the running game getting going and how he's looked. And I think if they knew they were going to give him 12 touches, that could easily turn into 18 or 20 if they get control of that game. The Charles Clay question to me, the tough part of the Charles Clay question is
Jamie Collins.
What's that?
No Jamie Collins.
Well, no Jamie Collins, but Sammy Watkins is playing. They've got both of their running backs. I do think that teams are going to stay closer with New England than they have in the first half of the season, and I don't expect Tyrod Taylor to have to throw the ball more than 15 to 20 times. I don't expect it to be like Week 2 when New England burst out to a big lead and then everything has to open up for Tyrod Taylor. I think this is going to be a bit more of a back and forth affair. But Matt, what do you have to say about Gates, Clay, and just our tight end that we're talking about right now?
No, I mean I have Gates in the league and I'm starting him, and I'm starting him over a guy like Anderson, and I would probably start him over somebody like Clay at this stage just because of the need for Gates in this ball game and the inventive ways that he and Phillip Rivers can get him open to get the ball. I mean, there aren't a lot of quarterback tight end combinations in the league where they're going to look at each other and go, that thing we did back in 2005,
right.
I mean, that's kind of what you're getting here with these two, and you have to really take that seriously into account, that they have that much rapport that they can go, 2009 Schottenheimer, week 12, and probably be able to pull something up and do it.
It's funny that you say that too, because when I'm on the fence about Antonio Gates in any given week, I always remember that week that San Diego played in Cleveland in the snowstorm and nobody did anything except Antonio Gates had like an 80-yard touchdown that week. I think the game was actually like 13-3 and the 7 was accounted for because Antonio Gates just on one play, like Gene said, he can always just do it on one play. Okay, let's look at some of these games. Matt, I'm going to toss this one to you totally open-ended, all right? You've watched every Atlanta game this year. Give us a couple of things coming out of the bye. Indy at Atlanta, really intriguing game, a lot on the line for both teams. Again, with teams that are trying to keep from going into a tailspin down the stretch with a lot on the line. What's a few things that stand out when you picture this Indy-Atlanta game in your mind's eye?
I see Frank Gore getting just like a huge truckload of carries, and them hoping for the best that he can move them up and down the field, and then let Matt Hasselbeck pick his spots. Hopefully to some reliable players like be able to get it downfield to guys like Hilton, and maybe use those tight ends a little bit more in this particular game, and I think that from that side of the field, that's going to be their formula, is that they can run the ball, do a little play action, pick their spots, and be very efficient short passing, and put Atlanta in some uncomfortable defensive situations where they can keep going to the well and just nickel and dime them to death. Atlanta, what I'm hoping to see is that they start throwing the ball with more abandon to Julio Jones. That if Julio Jones can get open against the 49ers on a deep post and they hit him, it's time to start throwing some of the fade routes. It's time to start throwing some of the play action deep routes and stretching out defenses who are selling out against Devonta Freeman on this outside zone runs. Now, I know that they've had some issues with their center and they've had to put in a replacement, and that's been a little bit of a dicey call for them, and the teams, when they've sold out against the run, have been able to hold these guys. But they need to be able to do something to stretch the field, and they also have to be more courageous about running up the middle and letting Freeman use his acumen to bounce plays outside, to set up blocks, and to find alternate creases and start from the middle and work outside, rather than say, my name's Kyle Shanahan, I'm known for the zone run scheme, and my ego absolutely depends on me going outside on every single play, or I'm scared of Navarro Bowman, and let's not, and that's what they did. And if they do that with Quell Jackson or whoever that the Colts have inside, that's going to be an issue. That's going to be an issue for them again this week. So I'm hoping with the bye week that what happens is that they're a little more vigilant going up the middle. They're a little more vigilant throwing the ball downfield and using Julio Jones on sideline fade routes, which you have not seen this season. And that would mean a play calling tweak or change to Shanahan's system. And the other tweak that they really need to do is to let Matt Ryan look at plays at the line of scrimmage, use a little more up tempo, not all the time. You don't want to have a bunch of 3-and-outs and then put the defense on the field all the time. But in key moments where if they do catch the Colts in a defense that they like, that they can run some more up-tempo work, let Matt Ryan audible at the line, throw some quick passes to receivers other than Julio Jones, who don't run routes very well anymore or don't catch the ball extremely well when they have to run a more complex route. Leonard Hankerson is the guy on that reference, and then Roddy White is the other guy who just doesn't run routes all that great anymore in terms of his ability physically to make some of these hard cuts, and get them involved in the game off of these quick hitters that they can do by looking at the formation and seeing that they have an advantage with an open zone and just picking up easy yards. If Atlanta can pick up easy yards in this game, then you are going to see a really big offensive day for Atlanta, and they could dominate this game, and it will look like that they've gotten back on track. Though I'd still be a little skeptical about that, But because I think it would be done by a little bit of smoke and mirrors more than anything against a suspect defense. But at the same time, what I'm truly expecting is Kyle Shanahan to remain a little stubborn, then probably not go into this high tempo thing. The Colts offense to compress the field, defense to compress the field for Atlanta's offense, and this to be one of these 17-13 type of games that just feels like that's not going to be a whole lot of fun to watch, and that 17-13 will probably end up being the team that's the most flexible with their offense, and I have a feeling that that's going to be Indianapolis because they've already been through the shakedown and have had their ego tamed a little bit.
And to use our boxing metaphor again, this is one where they just stand and jab, 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 jab. Like just there's not
and clinch.
Yeah, exactly. Like not throwing any big punches because it leaves you open to big punches. Gene, one of the bigger games of the day, maybe the biggest game of the day in terms of what's on the line, we haven't even really talked about yet. Someone talked about quoting Andre 3000. You can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. So Aaron Rodgers owners' picnics have been rained on over and over and over again. Green Bay, if you're in any part of the Green Bay offense, it's been raining. It's been raining every week for 3 weeks now. Gene, is all there is to do is like do a rain dance or do rain dance, a sun dance, pray for change. Is there some story we can tell ourselves that against Mike Zimmer's Minnesota team on the road, it's going to look different this week than it has for the last 3 weeks.
It's Aaron Rodgers. I think that's the best story you can tell yourself is it's the best quarterback in the league, and he can do things inside and outside the pocket to get his receivers open. I think a lot of this has to do with can the receivers execute today? Is that offensive line a little bit better? But yeah, between Mike Zimmer and between whatever might be going on with his shoulder, which I don't know what it is, if it's anything to be worried about or if it's just a little bit of irritation because he continues to have to throw at odder and odder angles and he's throwing the ball a little bit more frequently. It may be nothing more than just a little bit overuse. It's hard to know. But at some point, Rodgers is going to break out of the slump. And if he can sort of settle himself down and, James Jones can be a little bit more effective on the outside. Randall Cobb's got a little bit of a difficult matchup in the slot today. But, you get Eddie Lacy back healthy. Maybe the running game gets going a little bit more. But I think the biggest concern here is Rodgers struggles on the road in division games. In the last couple of weeks haven't been all that promising for him. So, but again, it comes back to the first thing I said, which this is Aaron Rodgers. At any point, Aaron Rodgers, as we saw in the fourth quarter against Carolina a couple of weeks ago, can take over a game regardless of the personnel around him. So I don't think you can completely write him off, but there's definitely reasons for concern against Zimmer today.
Matt, are you breaking ties for or against your Packers today?
Oh, gosh. I'm against the Packers today.
So someone asked me this question. And to me, this felt self-evident. Palmer over Rodgers. I mean, I didn't even have to pause. Am I not giving the factor Gene brought up enough weight here that it's Aaron Rodgers?
The only pause I gave to type yes was that I was doing it with one hand while we were talking, and I was updating something. That's the only reason why there was a delay for mine.
Nice. I'll leave you guys with this one thing and I wish I could remember who brought it up. It was somebody in the question thread at Football Guys, and it was a really good one. We haven't talked about Carolina. Carolina has Washington today. Cam Newton, I think, over Aaron Rodgers today also, by the way. But looking ahead, Carolina has a 2-game lead already for home field, and they have nobody left on their schedule. Week 16. If you own Cam Newton, is it time to look at who your backup quarterback is and look at Week 16 matchups? Matt, are we getting way too ahead of ourselves here, or is this exactly the time that we need to be thinking about this?
Who are they playing again? Who'd you say?
Atlanta. But I mean, if they have a 3-game lead, if they're 14-0 heading into Week 16, and no other team, if Arizona just drops one more game, if Minnesota just drops one more game,
it's not too late to consider these types of things, and I think it's probably the right time to, you don't want to remake your entire bench and have to make choices where you have to consider what position in your lineups, where if you have a really good starting lineup and you're looking for guys that you can say they have good Week 16 matchups in case my starters who got me there are going to get benched midway through the game, you have to look at your priorities in terms of who's going to produce the most points for you and which position has the smallest the most narrow margin between points between the best guys and the worst guys. And I would say that from a quarterback standpoint, obviously I don't think that you have to go out of your way to try and get guys at that position, whereas I think there's going to be usually more available on the waiver wire. There's going to be a narrow margin between a good player and a bad player, and that means that you can wait a little longer to pick a guy up. At running back or at wide receiver, I think it's a little bit of a different story. It's going to be easier to find wide receivers who you can have a what the heck, and hope for the best with them. Running back, though, that's the position where I would start looking at guys who might be able to make an impact for you down the stretch when they get inserted in the lineup, who can at least give you some basis of points where the difference isn't going to be 10 to 15 point differences, whereas with quarterbacks the differences might be 5 to 7 points.
Gene, and I'll add another factor here. Riverboat Ron, because we're always saying, what kind of coach are they? Bruce Arians probably won't rest anybody. Riverboat Ron, we have a different track record to think of. And I'm going to be honest here. I really hadn't even thought about this until someone brought it up in a question thread, which, again, to other fantasy analysts out there that might be listening or watching, this is why you should make yourself accessible and take lots of questions, interact a lot with people, because they're going to get your mind to the things that people are thinking about, which you might not have considered. Gene, if you own Cam Newton and he's been carrying you, is it time to look at who your backup is and look at Week 16 and start to see the way these forces might converge?
Sure. I think it always is. I would not be worried about them benching Cam in Week 16, even if they have an insurmountable lead for the bye. However, I do think it's very likely that they will tell him, stop running the ball downfield 20 times and banging into people instead of sliding at the 5 or 10 yard mark once you get whatever yards you need to get. And I think instead of seeing 10 to 12 Cam carries, we may only see 4 or 5, which could be enough to even though he's not being rested altogether, that might drop him into a tier where you want to be considering a backup quarterback in a high upside situation anyway. So that's a spot where you might want to upgrade your roster a little bit, but I think we're probably going to still see Cam in 16.
Fun times. And by the way, on that note today, in that Carolina-Washington game, and we know Washington secondary very vulnerable, no Corey Brown. So Devin Funchess and Ted Ginn. Yes, I have a few stacks. I have a few Ginn Newtons, Funch Newtons. Yummy. This is always great to have the opportunity, the privilege to serve you all on Sunday mornings, to get to talk to my good friends Matt and Gene about football. And wow, is it another tremendous week of football, no matter how your fantasy teams are doing, no matter how your lineups are doing in DFS or otherwise. Enjoy it. Remember that this game, it's scintillating, it's stimulating, and it's always fascinating, and it always sets up the next week. We'll turn the page, and we have 3 games on Thanksgiving. Speaking Carolina, Dallas, Philly, Detroit, and Chicago, Green Bay. And we will not be with you Thursday night. It's family day. Whoever your family, whether they be blood or not blood relations, I hope everybody has an opportunity to do that. And we'll be back at you next Sunday morning with our live hangout. We appreciate all of you so much. We appreciate this opportunity, and we look forward to being able to do this for a long time. So thanks to Matt and Gene for giving you their valuable time and expertise. And thank you always. Have a great Sunday.